All right, and then the infundibulum leads into the uterine or fallopian tube, which then leads into uterus. And there's a muscle layer and a capillary layer, I guess, blood layer. Right. Yes, so maybe we can zoom in. All right, so endometrium. And the muscle layers are myometrium. All right, and this one has two uteruses. And what's at the end of the uterus here? All right, so it has two cervices. All right, and then we've got a very strange thing going on here, right? So this is all the vagina.
What's the middle turns into the birthing canal?
Yeah. So the middle is the book calls it a pseudo vagina slash birthing canal.
Kangaroo, right? So, does contractions just push it down like into here?
Yeah, so
And
the
then
vagina
they
is
all
not a
muscular
muscular layer. It does not have a muscular layer. So yeah, it gets pushed out and then it has to crawl out of here.
What happens?
And find the
is it
find the teat.
possible for it to like go wrong?
Took a wrong turn.
No, actually, because these are actually much smaller,
Okay.
and the one in the middle is wider. Okay.
With its little highway.
Yeah.
It's a tiny highway.
So the vagina is the birth canal, but it's also where the sperm is deposited, right?
Yes.
So what kind of problems do you see here? And
Yeah. Not making
long way to go.
Not making it, or it can be stored. Didn't it talk about like delayed fertilization because it's can be stored?
Yeah. So it actually has delayed implantation.
Implantation.
Yeah. Or delayed development.
So it does get fertilized, it just doesn't get developed into a fetus.
Right. Or the fetus will stay really small until it's ready. But what about the fertilization process? Well, and what do you know about penises? So it's got a right angle to go here, right? It's not actually supposed to go. This is only the birth canal. It's not used for the semen deposits. So these guys are used for the semen deposits.
Oh, really?
Oh man,
Huh.
that's weird.
That's weird.
That's rough.
So actually, kangaroos have, the penis actually goes both ways and doesn't go in the middle.
Well, makes more sense now.
Okay. It's more general. Those are some exceptions. These are three types of eutherian penises. And most penises fit within these three types, including those forked ones. So on the bowl here, this is an example of a musculo-cavernosus penis. So musculo is referring to it's muscular. It has a muscle surrounding it. Cavernosus is it has these sinuses that fill with blood during an erection, and so it's that engorging with blood that causes the erection. Okay, and then a slight variation to that is down here. And all we do is we add the prefix osteo, musculo-cavernosus. Yeah, so this has a baculum, okay, which is a bone, okay, which adds support to the erection, but it still has the muscular and capillary sinus network, which engorges with blood, and you can see that that's the corpora cavernosa here. But when that engorges with blood, then it pushes everything out, and in this instance, which I think this is a dog or some canid, it has a foreskin covering the whole thing, and then it releases on an erection. Okay, and then the third penis type, this is a pig over here, is fibroelastic. And so this one is actually, doesn't have muscle, it's all connective tissue. And it has this S shape here, sigmoid flexures, I'll write that bigger. And so on an erection, this will straighten, so it'll have a tendon which tightens, and then that pushes the penis out.
That's the name of the tendon.
No, that's the name of the shape. I'm not sure what the tendon is. Okay, and so these penises are very thin and long. There's no muscle. And sometimes can be, like, have a corkscrew in them as well. Yeah. So those are your more general concepts. The next one here, a forked penis. And I couldn't actually, can't confirm if this is actually a kangaroo penis or not, because I couldn't find one. There wasn't one in the book, and this is a Google image search, and there were different levels of forking. So some of them had much smaller forked penis, and it was just kind of like this. This one's very, very forked.
It's very weird.
But
How does it look like?
it has some sort of forking, so it's so a forked penis to match the female reproductive tract. This is an echidna to the right or left.
This isn't
I
all
was speaking-
marsupials though, right? This is only a few of them.
Right. So the kangaroos, but yeah, there's other types within there as well of the vaginal shapes. And most of them are just one vaginal birth canal, all the same. But this echidna has 4 heads on its penis. And I tried to look up why, and they don't really know why. It just does, but they do know when it fertilizes, actually half of it turns off. And it only ejaculates from one half. And then the next time it ejaculates from the other side. I don't know what's going on. We don't. And so, and oftentimes, and this I think you might mark up to the random thing. You know, it doesn't.
Just some things happen.
It just happens, and it still works. There's still baby echidnas being born, but maybe there's no function to this, or no. I don't see how this would be advantageous to just having one head, but it has 4.
I guess if it's not disadvantageous, then it persists in the population.
Fair.
Right. Yeah.
Quite fair.
Echidnas are also our only monotrims, so it could have just be this. You know, they may have had much more variation, but through genetic drift, this is. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, platypus too. You're right, but only those 2. They live in New Zealand, I believe, or somewhere or Australia, somewhere in that area. Okay, but these are strange penises. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about some male morphology. So testes can be internal, external, or both. And if it's external, it's usually housed in a scrotum, which is away from the body cavity. Okay? But if the biological purpose of life, what is the biological purpose of life? To reproduce, right? Survive and reproduce. If that's your purpose as an organism, that puts the testes in a very vulnerable position, right? Internal, they're protected with everything else. So why would they? What sort of reason might you think of as to why you would have an external testes? Okay, yeah. So the temperature, and what does that allow? Why have a different temperature?
Doesn't it keep the sperm at peak level for fertilization?
Well, it's actually opposite.
Yeah, it makes it so they're hibernating basically, so that way they're not gonna die as fast.
Right. Okay, so how would that help?
Because it takes a lot of energy, right? It's a lot of energy because whatever you're putting into it has to be able to survive and continue living. So you have to put a lot of energy into the thing, right? The tiny baby. So that has to have a kickstart.
Right. So you've got the metabolic cost. Oops. Of making sperm. All right, that's going to require energy. So if you keep them at, like Aaron said, if you keep them at a temperature where they're ready to activate at any time, that's going to cost you energy as well. But if you can cool them off a little bit and put them in kind of a dormant state, then they'll last longer. Basically, just put them in the refrigerator, which the scrotum basically is the sperm refrigerator. Gonna last longer. Okay, but there are some species that have internal testes.
So are they just not making sperm when it's internal? They don't make it all the time?
It just that is one thing that does happen. So we'll talk about, there are some species that have descending and ascending testes. So the scrotum develops during the reproductive season, and then the testes descend into the scrotum, and then they become enlarged and they produce sperm. And then in the non-reproductive season, they regress back into the abdominal cavity. So yeah, that does happen, but some have them internal all the time. Okay, so for example, dolphins and whales have internal testes. What's the trade-off there, you think? Yes, right. So they have selection pressure for being aerodynamic and reducing drag. And so if you had, could you imagine this very sleek dolphin and then testes hanging off the back, right? It would slow it down quite a bit.
And then whales, and they have really big testes, so it'd be even worse.
Yeah, well, some whales, we'll talk about that, but yeah, some whales have really, really big testes as well. Yeah. So this is all kind of encapsulated in what's called the activation hypothesis. Okay, this is for why you have why there are external testes. And there's some data that support this. So, for example, during coitus, the testes actually retract and hug up against the body cavity and increase in temperature. So they are essentially being activated by the body, the rest of the body temperature. So and then also, when ejaculated, the sperm are going into the female reproductive tract, which is an environment, has an elevated body temperature, right? So the temperature increase, it activates sperm motility. Or movement. And the amount of time it takes to activate them is similar to the amount of time, required for fertilization, or how long coitus lasts. But there's still this danger of being external. And so generally, testes are have a concentration of pain receptors. So males will avoid damaging their testes, and thus ruining the point of their life, biologically speaking. But there are other ways in which, so even in dolphins, the testes actually are cooled. Even though they're internal, they're still kept at a lower temperature, and they do that through a network of blood vessels that pull heat away from them. And as far as I know, I think only mammals have external testes. Everything else has internal testes. So this is also kind of goes with, they have an increased metabolism. So any way that they can save energy, and this is one way, by not having to continually make sperm, or having their sperm refrigerated and last longer. All right, any other testes questions? Okay, so this is what Alyssa alluded to. One of the reproductive strategies of some mammals is sperm competition. Okay, so what breeding strategy do you think would coexist with sperm competition? So as far as how males and females reproduce or mate. Okay, non-monogamous, yes.
Are you talking about like inter-sexual?
No. Yeah, so yeah, polygamous, and even more specific, polyandrous. Okay, what does that mean? So there's two types of polygamy. There's polyandrous and polygynous. What's that?
Polyandrous is multiple males,
Right, so multiple males mating with the same female. Whereas polygynous, where there's one male with multiple females, that would not result in sperm competition. Okay, but there's one other breeding strategy. So if you have multiple males and one female, okay, what's some other, can you think of other characteristics? What about monogamous? Would that result in sperm competition? No. So the third one is promiscuous. And what does that mean?
Not only does multiple males meet, well, promiscuous is just like, you know, the male also.
Yeah.
Like multiple, so it's just like whatever.
So everyone's mating with everyone, right? As many times as possible. So there's no like one with multiple or vice versa. It's just multiple females with multiple males and multiple males with multiple females. So promiscuous or polyandrous.
So polyandrous, the female mates multiple times and the males only mate once.
Right.
And then promiscuous, both males and females mate multiple times.
Right. Okay, so if you're promiscuous, your likelihood of impregnating a female depends on how quickly you have access to that female or how much sperm you can produce. Right? Or the quality of the sperm, maybe. So then looking at the characteristics, physical characteristics of males, what would you expect in a species that exhibits sperm competition?
High volumes of sperm, so like a lot.
Okay, yes. And so physically, how does that, what allows you to have high volume of sperm?
Large.
Well, it's actually not the penis, but that would be,
Large testes.
yeah, so large testes, that's where you're going to produce the sperm. But how would a large penis help?
Distribution.
Yeah, so at least a longer penis, one closer to the cervix, is going to, you know, decrease the distance between the egg and the sperm. Okay, so on this graph here, this is of baleen whales. And we have body weight on the right and testes, or sorry, on the x-axis, testes weight on the y-axis. What species here do you think then are more likely to have sperm competition? Yeah, right whale for sure. Bowhead, maybe the gray whale too. But these other ones below the line, more likely they don't. And then when you look at the characteristics of their penises, it also follows the same pattern. They have a large penis compared to their body size. And in fact, the right whale has testes that weigh 500 kilograms.
Oh my gosh.
So that's a lot of sperm, right? And there would be no other reason to have that much if you didn't have this strategy, breeding strategy. Okay. All right, so then let's switch over to the female reproductive tract. Okay, so we talked about the kangaroo, and we drew, last time we basically drew a human uterus. What type of uteruses, when looking at these four, are those? Simplex is human or kangaroo?
Oh, human.
Okay, good. All right, then what about the kangaroo?
The duplex.
Yes. Okay, bipartite is very similar to duplex, except it only has one cervix. And then bicornate is just basically an intermediate between bipartite and simplex. So it has that division there, but it's not as far down as the bipartite uterus. Okay, and in fact, there is a condition in humans where they have this separation. So they have a bicornate uterus. I can't remember what it's called, but it does affect fertility.
Like make it more likely for twins, or make it harder to have.
Make it harder to have baby. But I don't know why.
There's less room.
Yeah, maybe. But
Things could get stuck.
okay, so I want you guys to pick a uterus and find an animal other than these ones that we've talked about. And or you can do the opposite. Pick an animal, pick a mammal, and determine what type of uterus it has. Placenta, whoops, that are important for forming the placenta. So the placenta forms from these same tissues, right, that are important for the amniotic egg. If it is the yolk sac tissue that forms the placenta, as in over here in Macropodidae, which is our genus of kangaroos, that is a chorion vitelline placenta.
That means yolk forms the placenta.
Yeah, so the yolk tissue is forming the placenta. And so the yolk is initially providing the nutrients for the embryo. So that's naturally where you think the first placenta or the ancestral trait would be. Okay, but in therians, such as a primate, it's actually the allantois, I don't know how to say that one, which forms the, and that's the chorioallantoic placenta.
So then
Okay.
what forms the placenta there?
The allantoid, this one. Atlantis.
I think you had this problem last year. I remember this.
I need to look this up, how to pronounce this.
None of us know what this is.
Allantois. I know I'm saying it wrong, but I don't know how to say it. So, that's what forms the placenta in our therians. What do you notice about this paramelomorphia here? Do you remember what was the common name of paramelomorphia? Right, yeah, so bandicoots and friends.
What was the question?
What kind of placenta does it have?
Choriovitelline, just like the. It has like two different something.
Yeah. It has both.
The vascular and the non.
Okay, and so what the chorioallantoic placenta allows also is invaginations called villi. Okay, which increase the surface area and allow for more exchange. Okay, whereas you can see the chorioviduline placenta over here, it doesn't have those folds. It's not as efficient in exchange. And we discussed our kangaroos, they are altricial or precocial. Which one? They're altricial, right? Yeah, so they don't actually spend very much time in here. And they are born very soon. So there's not much, this nutrient exchange here, I mean, it's important, but most of its growing it does after it attaches to the teat and gets it from the milk. But the bandicoots have both, and they actually grow at a much faster rate because they have more exchange occurring. The villi as well allow for exchange to occur more efficiently. And so when you compare therians to metatherians, the placenta is much more efficient. The embryos grow much faster, or the fetuses grow much faster. And so that is one reason why they think when you put them together, the reproduction of therians is quicker and they replace many of the metatherians. Okay, but how those villi, how those villi are distributed are also how you can determine different placenta types as well. Did we talk about this last time? No? Okay, so you have if the villi are evenly spaced, this is called a diffuse placenta. If they are in these like large circular concentrations, it's called cotyledonary. If it's just on one area, it's called a discoid placenta. And then if it's just in a band, it's called a zonary placenta. Okay, so sheep are cotyledonary. Discoid are primates and humans. Zonary are carnivores. I think there are some other ungulates which are diffuse other than sheep.
Discoid with what?
It was like just one, humans, primates. All right, so those are different types of placentas. Another interesting thing is in afterbirth, where if the villi are concentrated, then they will, after birth, once the placenta passes as well, then there's a lot of bleeding that occurs because of that connection. But in mammals that don't have the connection, like in these kangaroos, there's no bleeding even after they pass the placenta. It's called deciduous and non-deciduous placentas. Bandicoots, are distributed, just like leaves.
Does that mean whether or not the placenta causes bleeding?
Yeah, after birth.
I know like some people say that
Yeah, and make it into a smoothie and drink it.
More pills.
Yeah.
Rite of passage or something, I guess. Okay, so now moving on. After they are born, then you have different strategies for then feeding them. And these are exhibited in the marine mammals, seals, sea lions, and walruses, pinnipeds. So okay, so the kind of the default or primitive trait is just aquatic nursing, which is similar to just how all other terrestrial mammals are going to lactate and nurse, just whenever they can. The young swim up or walk up and start nursing. But for sea lions, which are these guys, and seals, they have their pups on land, but then they eat in the ocean, right? So they have to do something to balance that. So sea lions have a foraging cycle where they will leave the young, they'll leave their pups, and then go out to the ocean and eat for 2 weeks. And then they come back and nurse for a little bit. The seals, however, will do all their foraging beforehand, and they are super fat, okay? And then when their pups are born, they just won't eat. And so they'll nurse for, a month, and then the pup will be grown enough at that time to go back into the water. And then some of them do both. So they'll fast initially, and then they'll go out and have to eat to replenish their lactation and back and forth. And so this is quite energetically expensive for the females in order to do that. So they have to have lots of blubber storage in order to complete that. We already covered altricial and precocial. All right, let's in the quiz. But this will be our last little topic today. So, delayed fertilization, implantation, or development. So this is where either sperm is stored, so that would be delayed fertilization, where the female stores the sperm inside a reproductive tract, and then fertilization occurs later. Or delayed implantation, where fertilization takes place, and the zygote will go through rounds of mitosis, but it won't actually implant into the uterus for a period of time. Or delayed development is where fertilization takes place, implantation takes place, but it remains in a holding pattern until a later time as well. Okay, so why would this occur? Why would you have this delay or this period of time where nothing is going on?
Because sometimes, like, gestation isn't a really good time. Like, it could be like in the middle of the winter, or like the female isn't like very healthy, perhaps.
Yeah, so that's one possibility, and generally it's not necessarily the female being healthy, but again it's a cost. Well, it's both. So it's both either the resources required to maintain that pregnancy, and also once it's born, then lactation is going to commence. So it needs to have nutrients available for that. So that's going to be best done in the spring if you're in a temperate area, or in the wet season if you're in a tropical area. But there are other reasons as well. Can you think of another reason? So there are a few different types of bats do all three of these, different species of bats. But then there are ungulates, and then we talked about actually the kangaroos can have delayed implantation. Why do they do it? Or they have delayed development, sorry, not delayed.
Just like already got a baby thinking.
Okay. Yeah, so why don't they just not get pregnant when they have when they're nursing?
Because why not?
If you can do it, why not? What about where kangaroos live might shape? Well, so they live in Australia, but what about Australia is? Yes, but not necessarily. It's hot and dry, so it's a desert. And deserts have periods of time where it's in drought, okay, or when it rains, then you have this short period of time where you can a lot of resources are available. So if it can reproduce very quickly, like have one pregnant and one nursing at the same time. And they can then cycle through continuously. But what if it starts and then in the middle it is, so that's, sorry, let me go back. So if it has a baby and is nursing, or a joey in the pouch, it doesn't want to develop the pregnancy that's already occurring because that would be too much strain on its resources. But as soon as that one's grown up, then it doesn't have to mate again. It can just develop the next one. Right? But what happens then if a kangaroo is, lactating or pregnant, and then a drought happens and all the resources dry up? Does anybody know? It just kicks out the joey and aborts the pregnancy and moves on.
Really?
Yeah. So if it doesn't have enough resources to provide for both it and its developing young, then it chooses itself. And it'll just wait until the next abundant resources to reproduce. Yeah. All right, and there's one other reason. So it mentioned some seals, or I think sea lions do this, and that is because they actually, the males and females forage in different areas. Okay, so they aren't always in contact for mating to occur, and so they will mate at a specific time of the year when they come together. But then when they separate, it's generally not ideal conditions for gestation to continue, and so they delay implantation, I believe, until the birthing season. But the mating season is kind of what defines then when they can mate, obviously, but it doesn't correspond with the best time to have young if it just went straight into pregnancy and birth. Okay, we're out of time.